Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with my friend Dave Frenicky out in Arizona, active note investor for many, many years, and even beyond that, active real estate investor. So once again, combining the skills of real estate investing with real estate note investing, he's a great example of that. And he's always got some great stories that envelop multiple lessons in a case study, as I like to call them. And that's essentially what happened on a deal and walking you through. And I found that's a valuable way for people to learn. It's something that they can relate to. It's something they can retain in a story format. So I asked Dave to come on and talk about this particular deal. And I'm hearing about it the first time too. So we'll see how this onion unfolds, if you will, as we talk to it. So Dave, how are you?
Great, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. So it's always good to see you. I haven't been to Arizona since last year, November or something. So,
Yeah.
Hopefully all this stuff clears up and I'll be out there again and we'll hook up for sure. But you've got an interesting case study here on a property that you purchased the note on out in Michigan, which again, if you're new to the note business, that is totally not uncommon. In fact, that is how things are done. You go to where the opportunities are. And so it doesn't matter. You live in one state and invest in the other. But just as clarification, tell us about the property, and maybe we'll start with a little bit of what you found on the discovery of this. In other words, when people are new to the business or even have a little bit of experience, we always talk about in terms of, well, you've got to do your due diligence, and that really gives you a discovery of what's going on. So maybe tell us from that format of, here's the property, here's what they were asking, but here's what I discovered when I started my due diligence, if you would.
Fair enough. Great, Kevin. Yeah, this, as you mentioned, this property's in Redford, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. Strong area, not the stuff that you might hear about where there's a bunch of burnt teardowns or just scrapes. It was a mortgage. It was not a land contract. And it was on a spreadsheet, so I had to go through and do my due diligence with that. What I found is that the original mortgage went back to November of 2006, and the unpaid balance was $146,000. So it was at the height of the market at that time.
Yeah, 2006, right? So all property values were still on the dramatic incline at the time. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Great location, as I mentioned, brick house, clean, all the emotional equity you would think. So apparently the payor got in trouble. The note had been sold, and it was an adjustable rate mortgage. So the new note owner, the hedge fund, went to the payor, the borrower, and said, yes, we will help you to do a modification. So they took this $145,000 balance with an interest rate, I think at that time was 11, 12%, 10%, I don't know, whatever it was at that time. The payments were small, like $215, $230 a month. Mm-hmm. But they modified that, Kevin, down to $20,000. It's like, what a gift. Mm. Of course, the house value dropped too.
Yeah, I was going to say, so back just for everybody's frame of reference, 2006, if you all remember, property values going up and loans were easy to get. And a lot of them were adjustable rate loans, which, people just never figure, well, they can't adjust that high. Well, yeah, they adjusted. We've seen plenty, you and I, of 11 and 12% bank originated or mortgage company originated loans. And that seems to be what happened here to the point where this person, they got their payments up to about $1,400 per month on the original loan, right? That's where they fell in trouble. So 2008, I mean, part of this, again, I always like to say in all of my trainings, it's numbers and it's story. And this is kind of a combination of both here. So you could just imagine that their property value is going up and then all of a sudden dramatically, especially outside of Detroit, dramatically dropping, and they still owe $140,000. And if you owe $140,000 and your house is now worth half of that, or worse, you've got to start to think, well, why am I even paying this? And they fall into trouble. So they did get lucky, I guess, as you're saying, in a way where they went into default. Obviously, this was a non-performing loan that was probably packaged up by this company and sold to this hedge fund. And then the hedge fund took the time to address it and make it work, which I think is a valuable lesson there. In the note business, we can help a lot of people stay in their homes, and that's really exactly what happened here. Now, that's a rather dramatic loan mod to go from essentially owing 140 to down to 20. But what did you find out about that, if anything, or did you just move beyond that?
No, and then I also saw, of course, the monthly payment dropping from what, 1350 down to 250 or 213 or 225, whatever it was. So I thought, okay, that's good. You know, and the pay history looked good. When they did the modification, the payer, the borrower, came in with another $3,000 or $4,000, so it dropped the unpaid balance down. But so I paid, I think, 14 or so for the note on at that time a property value of 60. Sounds pretty secure. But the unique thing about this too, Kevin, is I bought this in my HSA, my health savings account.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
story behind this when we get to it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was all good. So I set up the servicing, and it went fine. And then in 2017, she gets behind.
Gotcha. Hang on one second. This is good, but I want to make sure our listeners follow here. So an HSA, for those who are not familiar, that's a health savings account. And health savings accounts are tax sheltered accounts that you can actually invest. Now, you put the money away for medical, but you build up enough in that account, you absolutely don't have to keep that in a cash or cash-like account. And if you have a self-directed IRA company that also does HSAs, which I think virtually every one of them does, that's another way to fund particular deals for yourself. So awesome. So you bought it through an HSA, and pick it up from there again.
Yeah. So the HSA is just like a Roth, in effect, how it works. So I thought this would be a great one. So my goal on the top end was to do a partial. As a matter of fact, I promoted that at my local meetup, the Note Investors Forum, as a partial. And then the payer messed up my plans. She started getting late, and she started getting later. And then I went after her with an attorney to foreclose, and she brought it current. And I hadn't looked at the loan docs, so I just thought, okay, we'll just get it going. And I knew I had no real risk there. So we got it going, and it cost me $1,500. Now, the other piece in this, Kevin, is in Michigan, if you have an attorney file a default notice, and in this case it was $1,500, you can only collect $75. Michigan caps you on what you can collect or tack onto the loan.
Wow. Okay.
So just these are little
some states you don't get anything, so I guess that's in a way better than nothing. But yeah, in other states, what he's saying is you can collect your legal costs as a part of that. In Michigan, you had to spend $1,500, but you only got 75 back.
Right.
Gotcha.
And then along the way,
so let me ask you a question though. So when you found this deal, you did fund it through the HSA, and then you purchased. I'm showing on my screen here about 150 payments, or was it, or 130?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, 131 remaining payments I see on my screen here. But let's say it was around 130 payments that you were entitled to, that you purchased. When you said you wanted to sell a partial, you went to your meetup group, which is filled with other investors looking to buy a good deal, and you were looking to sell them just a portion of those 130 payments.
Right. So my acquisition price was $14,000 plus or minus. So I was selling whatever payments that worked out to, and I think you'll be showing that on the screen, Kevin. $14,200 for whatever payments were there, and I would keep the tail in my HSA. It would build it up, and I just go on my way. But of course, things change.
So yeah, once the payments came late, all of a sudden your performing note started looking at a sub-performing note price. Yeah. Yeah. Less investors, especially new ones, became interested in that, so you had to change up plans. Right?
And not only that, because my HSA didn't have a lot of money. So I had spent the 14, I got some payments in, but the balance was limited. So it really capped me on what I could do in terms of growing that HSA. So it was like a double whammy. It's like, oh, really? So I went to the attorney. We got her to bring it current, and she continued. But in the course of time, between 17 and 19, September of 19, she was late 25 times. And then I start looking at the documents, and I thought, oh my gosh, what is this? What I found was, and I didn't see this when I bought it, or I just didn't remember it, there was a right of rescission. Or in other words, they modified the loan to these terms. And if she violated those terms, they would go away and the note unpaid balance would revert back to what it was before in 2012.
Okay.
Okay. So by that time, the property value had jumped to 110 from 60. So she could have sold the house and come out done really well before
Sure.
she did not. So I followed the letter of the law, if you will, the way the documents were written.
Mm-hmm.
I sent her a letter, regular mail, certified mail. Your terms are now rescinded. They are voided. You now owe 145 plus 10 for lates, 155,000. So she obviously had been going dark anyway and not talking. And she freaked out.
Gotcha. So you said initially, and I just want to make sure I heard it. You said, so in the agreement, this is the one when they reduced her principal balance down, or at least loan amount owed to 20,000. Okay, back in 2012, a part of that agreement said, if you don't live up to your obligation and make these payments on time, all the time, then your balance can revert back to the original 2006 balance.
Yep.
Right, of 145,000 or so.
Right. Now, I also went back into the documents, Kevin, and that hedge fund used Michigan's hardest hit funds to make up for that forgiveness.
Now that's why the 20,000. Okay, let me just again clarify here for everybody. This is great. So hardest hit funds, everybody, was a government program from federal level where Treasury Department, federal funds, gives states individual money to help people who fell behind on their payments during the crash. Well, this fits perfectly. The timeline and everything is perfect. She bought it in 2006. Problems happened in 2008. The markets crash. Her property's value is down. And the hardest hit funds allocated money. So the other company that bought this note, okay, from the original lender, they had her apply for hardest hit funds. Now, hardest hit funds doesn't give money to the borrower, they give it to the lender directly. And I believe, if memory serves correct, in Michigan, it may have been up to $40,000 that they would pay. So that hedge fund company who bought this note, had her apply, probably got a check from either $30,000 to $40,000 directly from Michigan, and thereby, could totally afford to go ahead and just drop her not only her balance down to 20,000, but her monthly payments by $1,100 per month, dropped down to 233. So that totally makes sense now on why something like that would happen. This whole thing where she rescinded her agreement, though, that became your game changer.
Right. So then, the moment she got that letter, she pushed the little red button. You know what that is, Kevin, right? CFPB.
Yeah.
So they send a letter to my servicer about her complaint. Well, it didn't go anywhere, but it freaked out the servicer. So we had to respond back with evidence that there was no abuse and she did, in fact, violate her agreement. Mm-hmm. So the servicer at that point got rid of all my other loans. They said, we're firing you. Did you hear what I said?
Okay.
So that's that. Okay. So they kept that. So then that didn't work for the payer with the little red button, CFPB. So she does a Chapter 13. And then COVID hit. So
gotcha. So she gets this letter saying, hey, your balance just went from less than 20,000 all the way back up to 145. So she filed a complaint to CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Board, or Bureau. Yeah. She contacted them to say this is an abusive lender, right? And that made your service company go, oh boy, I don't know if we want to be involved in this. But you showed them the paperwork, and they determined, the Bureau determined that it was not abusive. It was following letter of the law,
Claim
as you
just
said
went
earlier,
away.
the terms of the
Yeah.
agreement.
It just went away. But I mean, when you get that,
But now, who you said who fired you? Your servicing company was still a little shaken from
well,
that?
then I had another loan going bad, and they said, we got to get rid of this Franticke guy. You know, he's too much trouble. And they just didn't want to deal with it. So
You're not the
had
borrower?
another Michigan loan, another Detroit loan that was going south.
Oh, boy.
They said, no, we are going to deboard this. You're done. You're out of here.
Wow. Okay. All right.
It turned out that loan came around and all worked out well. So,
That's fine.
so then she did a BK, and like I said, COVID hit. So we were locked out of the courts.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to put together she wanted to do the 13 and try to make things work. Well, the numbers don't work or didn't work for that. So then in the middle of June, 2020, the court said, no, we're going to release this property from the bankruptcy.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So what happens in bankruptcy 13, everybody? It's known as a reorganization of your debt. And it's normally done in an effort to keep someone in their home. They have the ability to make payments. They're still getting income from their job. It's just their liabilities are higher than they have income coming in. So the bankruptcy courts will work with the secured investors, which obviously in this case Dave would be, because that loan that he owns is secured by the property, versus like a credit card. With a credit card debt, they'll probably eliminate that or drastically reduce that for her in an effort to keep her in her home. So when they declared that, there's an estoppel done where all the creditors get a notice, both secured and non-secured, that, hey, everybody leave her alone so we can figure this out. But that requires a judge, and if the courthouses are closed, there's no judge coming to court. Or attorneys. So that put a big pause on everything. And so when it resumed, what you're saying is that the bankruptcy judge was able to release it from the stay.
Correct.
Okay.
So
and you had to petition that, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I had to hire an attorney to act on my behalf and appear before the judge versus me doing whatever, which is the only way to do it, instead of trying to do everything yourself. Mm-hmm. So the moment that was released from the bankruptcy, I was in a really great situation. So I double checked my values. They were $110,000.
The property value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, the UPB was $155. That was irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And she lived there for 14 years. So you knew the property needed work. So in terms of figuring out the value of determining the value of that note, I just took the normal investor's formula, the 70% projected repairs, and I came up with a sales price of the non-performing note of $45,000, which would leave enough meat on the bone for the new buyer, knowing that they would have to either evict her or foreclose. I didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to deal with the Michigan stuff going on up there, for lack of another term, the politics. I thought, I just want to get my money and run. Mm-hmm. So I put out an email to my investor base, and I had 6 people raise their hand, were interested. Mm-hmm. The end buyer turned out to be a rather larger investor from Michigan, but a $3 million line of credit. He owns a lot of property in Detroit. He said, I'm good to go. We closed it within a week.
Nice.
So that if you look at the numbers, I paid 14. I think the UPB was down to 12. Had some other costs. I ended up selling it for 45. Not too bad. Tripling my money. Had to go through some hoops and some aggravation, which I try to avoid if I can. But it was a good deal. So the new investor, what the other side shot on this is, that investor said, Dave, if you ever got other properties up here, I am your buyer. So I have a friend. I did what I said I was going to do. We followed the letter of the law. I treated everybody fairly based upon the paperwork. And my HSA is now whole again.
Fantastic. So let's see. So she just, again, on a recap here, with the BK 13, it sounds like she moved into a bankruptcy 7 towards that direction. And the judge said, well, if that's the case, we'll release this property from the process and let the secured investors go after their security. And that's a common thing to happen when someone simply can't afford to make those payments, and the bankruptcy judge say, no, we're not going to hold up the secured investors on this any longer. So release that property from that. So so you're taking back a note. Now the balance is 145 plus. And you just priced it enough where it could sell, because you were in this thing. Oh boy, I forget even what you said, $11,500, something like that, just on purchasing the note. You had your legal cost and time invested obviously in this, and of course effort. But again, you had a minimal amount of money based on the fact now the collateral is worth 110. They owe 155, but when you mentioned, which is kind of irrelevant, what he meant was, of course, that number's irrelevant because you were only in it for such a small amount.
Right.
That balance, you're not going to charge somebody, you're not going to base selling the note off 155 because the property's worth 110. So you left meat on the bone, which I think is important as well. You priced it where you said, well, what would an investor pay? They don't want to be in a deal for more than 70% or so. So you priced it according to that, which essentially doubled what you had in it, it looks like, or pretty close.
Well, yeah, let's say 1245. What is that, 32, 33, or 33?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, so 44 back. My apologies. So you got, okay, great. Yeah, so converted, what would you have, 12, 13,000 in, you got 44,000 back.
Right. The other piece of this too, Kevin, with the bankruptcy, she was concerned about the taxable consequences of forgiven debt. So the bankruptcy neutralizes that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different moving parts here that you got to really think about as you go through it and understand what's the cause and effect of every situation.
Yeah. 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 Interesting. So it was probably a right move on her part if she just couldn't afford to catch up. But I'll tell you, the other thing is, for those listening, you have to have adaptability in this business, and you have to have a skill set that enables you to go from one exit strategy to another. And you've got to have the patience and the persistence to hang in this deal, because I could see some people bailing on this thing. I could totally see some people just getting to a point where they either bail on it or they just go, well, I guess we'll accept the payment when she makes a payment and try to get our money back, rather than, going through it as you did and taking it to that next step.
And then, Kevin, to that point, with individuals in this business, payers, you have a certain threshold, a pain threshold, patience threshold. I had reached mine. I just said, I'm done. I'm out of here. Now, let's fast forward this 6 months.
Okay. So, well, hang on. Okay. So I see where you're going here. So you're saying after you got all this done, and now you've got, you have this note sold to this other company. You sold it because, okay, I've been working on this one. I don't want to take it to the next level, which is foreclosing and everything else. I'd rather cut and run, triple my money, cut and run, and leave it to the other guy. So the other guy's story, the company that you sold it to.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Cool. Let's hear it.
So the other guy that I sold it to, he's an investor up there. He's willing to go through the 9 months or whatever he's going to have to do to get her out. Mm-hmm. And then he's going to rehab it and he'll rent it. It's a great rental property. Mm-hmm. But also, I've got him for a buyer down the road. But when I said fast forwarding, if you look at all the properties that are going to be coming up in default that aren't going to be able to make up their mod payments, this is a prime example of what one would be encountering with any of those non-performers that you might run into and buy.
Mm-hmm. Explain that a little bit more.
Okay, so let's say in May of next year, Kevin Shortell is looking at a pool of non-performing notes, and he buys 20 of them. You work them through, you get them modified out. Some of those are going to go south again. Mm-hmm. You're going to, I'll bet you $1, some of those will be replicating what we just saw here 3 or 4 years down the road. So you've got to be aware and cognizant of all the different possibilities, and you're not going in a straight line. It's going to be a lot of deviations, a lot of different rabbit trails, down a trail back, down a trail back. You never know. You just got to bob and weave, just like when you're skiing. You got to watch out for those moguls and just pivot accordingly.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking boxing.
Yeah, it is. Exactly.
Bob and weave in the boxing gym.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is. You know, everybody's going to make some small mistakes along the way as long as they're recoverable. For example, I'm sure the one mistake was when you didn't see that rescission or the notice of rescission deal in the original documents. You could have, but again, it's not something you would normally see in a set of documents. So I could see where you could totally miss that because it's not a paragraph that is something that you're used to seeing
Right.
in a document or that you're looking for in a document. Who's looking for that?
I just wasn't concerned with it.
It was there. Okay.
It was irrelevant to me at that time.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
So
at
shame
that
on
point,
me.
yeah,
See, I could have done, if I had been more cognizant, if I had noticed that in 2017, I could have shortened this whole process, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something to learn from every deal on all sides. I mean, like I said, you're gonna make mistakes, but as long again as they're recoverable, you've got the skill set. Did you have any advisors that you took on this, or you just kind of put nose to the grindstone and found this yourself, or did you ask any attorneys or anybody like that?
As it relates to what, Kevin, on the purchase?
And anything in this deal, like when you were going through trying to do these workouts,
the attorneys. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I law, I'm not an attorney. I don't want to play one on TV, all that. I just don't want to do it. So I just check with them what was right. Is this rescission real?
Yeah.
Is it viable? Is it going to come back and bite me later for trying to do it? We thought it might. It wasn't. The buyer of the note looked at it the same way. Nope, it's all good. So we followed the letter of the law.
Yeah. And on the CFPB, just as kind of a side note, because I've never had to deal with them before. What was that process? Were they hard to work with, or was that one of those areas, leave it to the attorney and they finally, the CFPB, again, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they just said, no, there's no problem here.
Great question. So the servicer and I worked out our response in an interrogatory. And we built a legal case of why I was correct in the method that I used to rescind the modification. Mm-hmm. And we just shipped it off to them. In the meantime, I had to go into the CFPB site and register, and I did the same thing.
Gotcha. So they weren't that difficult to work with because you didn't do anything wrong.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. The other thing is, so I bought this in my HSA, but I also have an LLC that I operate out of. So the payer, put in my LLC as the person that was, or the defendant, plaintiff.
Entity, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course that was erroneous too. But the bottom line is the servicer put it together, my third person representative, not me. It was cleaner that way. So again, using a servicer makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. These are, again, other lessons. There are people that self-service their note, collect the payments and everything else. But, when things go wrong, boy, trying to save a few bucks, not using a servicing company usually comes back to bite you.
And Kevin, if I could add one thing.
Yeah.
When folks are buying, the analytics are so important, meaning the loan to value, the investment to value. Yield is fine, but if you don't have that foundation there and allow for changes in the economy, you could be in trouble down the road. But I had that foundation there, which you taught me, mm-hmm. and that's really made the day.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And sticking by those guidelines, because hey, we're facing another change here. Nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen coming up towards the end of this year and beginning next year. So they're always going to have these undulations, but again, if you stick with the principles, you should be able to insulate yourself properly from the risk. And that's what Dave was saying there, investment to value, et cetera, that can do that for you. Well, great case study, Dave. I love it.
Good. So hopefully that your students and the listeners will learn from this, but I think it's it's foundational for the whole note business.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you mentioned your group out in Arizona, and we probably have some listeners out there in Arizona, or people who are watching this on YouTube. By the way, we're going to have this on YouTube. They can also find it on your site, Dave, but they may want to come to your meetup. So tell us where people can reach you.
Well, before COVID, it's called the Note Investors Forum. We meet in Mesa, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. It's typically the first Wednesday of every month for lunch at 11:30 at a pizza joint. We have 40 to 50 people there. It's a great interactive family type setup, if you will. We've been
It's
doing
in that big side room, right? Still in the big side? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been doing it for 5 years now. Of course, with COVID, we've been going virtual. And I hope by September, we're going to be able to go live again, meaning in the restaurant. So we've had it, I think we've had 3 or 4 Zoom meetings with the COVID stuff. And I'm taking a break in July, but we're going to resume virtual in August. And like I said, live in person in September of 2020.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. Well, I do appreciate it very much. You have a website or anything like that you want to give us as well? I do.
It's capstonecapitalusa.com. There are notes on there. They come and they go. There's a lot of educational material. I do buy notes. I sell notes. Kevin, you're in a couple of the videos on there. So it's all educational. And of course, the first page is a squeeze page for people that want to sell their notes to me. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of information there. It's just great education.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great education and great business to be in. And Dave, I always do appreciate it. And these stories mean so much to my listeners and my clients all the time. So I'll be looking forward to sharing this with them as well.
My pleasure, Kevin. And we look to see you in Phoenix here when this things settle down.
I hear you. Thanks again, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.